Amen. Well, good morning. It's so exciting to be here. I can honestly say I've never preached with a crew up here, so this is a lot of fun. Also fulfilled my lifelong dream of leading worship. I technically just did that, right? So that was amazing. But hey, thank you for joining us. We wish that we could be meeting together right now, but this is the next best thing for us. And if this is your first time with us, we have a saying around here that no matter what your walk of life is, no matter what your background is or where you're from, you're welcome here. You're welcome to come and to wrestle with questions and to think through a lot of the more serious and maybe even the lighthearted things in life. You've got a seat at the table with us, and so we're so glad that you've decided to join us from home, from your car, from wherever you're listening or watching us right now. Thank you, and we hope that this can be a blessing to you today, and that God would speak to you and speak to us. So we've been in the book of Daniel, looking at a series that we're calling New Normal. You've probably heard that phrase thrown around quite a bit with the pandemic and everything else. We're having to kind of readjust and figure out what life looks like in 2020. In what month is it? May, and figure out, we've got businesses closing, we've got all sorts of question marks, and we're having to stay at home and stay away from each other. And so for us, this is a new normal where we're having to figure out what this looks like, how we navigate this. Well, the good news is that this is not the first new normal that has taken place in history. We can actually look back and we can look at how some of our ancestors and the people that have come before us have dealt with new normals, some to the degree that we are right now, some not so much. But the encouraging thing today is that we're going to be looking in Daniel at a particular story, at a few young men who had a really particular way of dealing with it. The first 2 weeks, we've been following a guy named Daniel and his journey. This kind of the setting, the backdrop here is it's taking place in about 600 BC. We're following the people of Judah, God's chosen people, the Jews, and they've just been overthrown by the Babylonians. King Nebuchadnezzar leading them, and because of that, their kingdom was ransacked. Nothing was the same. Everything that they thought they knew was upended and turned on its head. Out of that, one of the strategies of Babylon was to take artifacts that belonged to the God of Israel and brought them in and put them in a temple with all of their own things that they believed in this culture in Babylon. And not only that, they took a huge crop of young individuals from Judah, brought them over, gave them new names, schooled them on Chaldean, Babylonian thoughts, and basically, we're going to take the generation right up from underneath Judah and completely uproot them from history. That was the plan. That's why they brought them in. And so as we kind of magnify in and we're looking at this, we looked in the first week at how Daniel dealt with this conundrum of not having a choice. What do you do when you don't have a choice? Because you might be able to think of an easy logical answer, but when it's you and you're sitting in the seat and you're taking the hits, what do you do when you don't have a choice? And then out of that, what is it like to realize that life is not so much in our control? How do we cope or deal with the fact that we don't have a lot to control in this life? What perspective can we bring in? And so we've examined both of those things. And this week in Daniel 3, as we're going to be hopping into the third chapter, the narrative shifts a little bit. We think some years have passed since the ending of chapter 2, which ended on a really high note. King Nebuchadnezzar had just promoted Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, gave them a lot of favor in the kingdom, and these were Jews in Babylonian culture. That was a big deal, and so they had just been promoted. But a lot of scholars believe that this takes place about 20 years later. King Nebuchadnezzar had been dealing with some revolts and all sorts of other things that were coming up in his kingdom, and so as we go through today, we're going to kind of look into this and the story that we've probably all heard about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Even if you're not acclimated with church, you've probably heard this story before. These guys they won't bow down to this statue, and so they get thrown into this big furnace. But when there's something miraculous happened, they didn't get burned up. They didn't even smell like smoke, and they came out, and the king was like, well, I mean, that's checkmate. Like, what am I going to do now? Like this, whoever your God is God, And we hear that story, and it's kind of one note for us, especially if we're in the church world. We kind of hear the story of just standing up in adversity. But what if we kind of looked at it at a deeper level? If we really examined Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as people, what led them to make the decisions that they made? What sort of lives did they lead that would allow them to be the type of people that could make hard calls and decisions? And so I'm going to ask a question today, and you can write this down if you're taking notes. But the question is, what do you think in your most crucial moment will enable you to make a wise decision? And so we're going to be examining that today. Would you pray with me just one more time really fast? Father, thank you so much for allowing us to meet, that even though we're dealing with this, we still have the gift of technology, that all across the city, we're able to gather together in our homes as families and wherever we're at and still meet together as a church in a different way, but we're still able to meet together and be encouraged and hear your word and worship together and sing. And so we're thankful for all of those things. Father, I ask that you would bring clarity on this passage today, that you would bring clarity on us, that you would bless us, and that you do something really, really cool with what you're wanting to say to us here, Father. Thank you so much. And it's in Christ's name we pray in faith. Amen. So if we're going to think about identity and identity formation, a couple of things pop to mind. And when you get out into the adult world, it becomes a little bit more gray. But I think probably the easiest and most stark contrast where we could all kind of look back and maybe collectively facepalm is our junior high experience, right? So back in junior high, I know for me, that was the first time that I ever dealt with self-awareness in my life. I had no idea how people perceive me. I didn't care. And all of a sudden I came into my 7th grade year and I was like, wait a minute, some cliques are forming, groups are showing up. I'm kind of realizing that I want to be involved with that. And the looks that I was getting on account of it was like, oh, wait a minute, I need to look at where I am. And let me just give you a picture. No offense to anyone if this is your current wardrobe, but this is just where I was at the time. So I would wear New Balances, but it was after they were initially cool and before they were cool again. So it was just that sweet spot of a few years. That's what I hit. And so I would wear New Balances with plaid cargo shorts. Plaid and cargo together in short format is what I would wear. That's a real thing. And I would wear a t-shirt that rarely matched. And my hair, David's got some luscious locks over here. But my hair was, if you've ever seen Dwight Schrute, it was like if he were 12 years old or 13 years old. I had a cowlick right here. I had a gap in my front teeth that you could drive a small tractor trailer through. I mean, it was, I wish I had a picture. I would show it. But a long time ago, this is where I was at. I mean, it was rough. And for the first time, I realized, like, wait a minute, if I want to fit in, then I'm going to have to start changing the way I look, changing the way I dress. And I started making some decisions that were not healthy, were not positive. But they began to reinforce my identity in a certain way over time. And so for me, it wasn't until later in my high school career that I realized, like, what did I make all these decisions for? Why did I want to fit in so bad? And in the process, I lost so much of what made me me. And I mean, around here, we believe that the only way to really discover and understand your identity is not to go out and find yourself somewhere, but to be able to know your creator. And that's an accessible thing, actually, and you can. And when you know your creator, then you can know who you are, and you know where your place in the world and what your gifting and skill set is. But I suffered from probably the worst form of decision-making, and maybe you can relate, but it's short-sightedness. It's only seeing what's right in front of me and making decisions based on that and not on the long term, not on, well, hey, someday I'm going to be married. Someday I'm going to have kids. Someday I'm going to have a job. Someday I'm going to have to pay bills. Even now, I've got a responsibility to the people around me. And being incapable of seeing that creates a crutch in your life. And we can look around and we see it in the world that has devastating results. We've seen it in our lives. We've all kind of woken up one day and looked in the mirror and thought, what in the world has happened to me? How did I get here? How did I get here? You know, maybe it's a few extra pounds. Maybe you're looking more like your dad every day. You know, whatever it is, like you're experiencing something, and the weight of your decisions every day are carrying you to that. Sitting in this room today, all of us are the sum total of our decisions up to this point in life. That's who we are in this room right now and where you are at home. And so as we dive into this story, let's kind of frame our perspective on, we're going to approach this and think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and what went into their identities in this culture. Who were they? So let's dive into verse 1 in chapter 3. So we're going to start off. King Nebuchadnezzar, the guy we just mentioned, made an image of gold. We've got to say one more thing before we move on from this. But King Nebuchadnezzar, in the previous chapter, had just had this big dream that took a whole army, literally, to figure out what it meant. Really, it culminated with Daniel coming up and God giving him what he needed to be able to interpret it. And the long and short of it is that he had this dream that was prophecy about kingdoms that would come and kingdoms that would rise and fall. And he dreamt about a statue. And this statue's head was made of gold. And so that gold represented King Nebuchadnezzar. And so we're looking at this about 20 years removed. He's dealing with some rebellions. This is probably him kind of understanding that the people are getting restless and him wanting to rally the culture back around what mattered from the beginning. And so he built this statue, and he made it completely with gold, maybe as a rebellion against the dream. We don't really know. The statue was not of him. The Babylonians did not believe their king was divine, so it wasn't necessarily a narcissism thing. But he was definitely rebelling against what the dream had previously said. Now, why is that important? A lot of times when we hear about Babylon, we think of, oh, what a terrible place, how awful, Well, I included a quote here. This is from a historian, and we can throw that up on the screen, who was looking at the kingdom of Babylon. So it says, King Nebuchadnezzar II, outside of the Bible, is depicted as a great king who not only restored Babylon to its former glory, but transformed it into a city of light. Under his reign, Babylon became a city which was not only wondrous to behold, but also a center for the arts and intellectual pursuits. Women enjoyed equal rights with men under Nebuchadnezzar's rule, though not completely equal in status by any modern day standard. Schools and temples were plentiful, and literacy, mathematics, the scientists, and craftsmanship flourished, along with a tolerance of and interest in other gods of other faiths and the beliefs of other cultures. So that sounds a lot like maybe the U.S. today. Sounds a lot like people having a lot more freedom in the world at that time. The Babylonians loved their king, generally speaking. He was a builder. I mean, the Hanging Gardens were said to be in Babylon, which is one of the most beautiful sites that have ever been made by man. The city itself was beautiful. They even had a gate and a walk that you could come into that was almost a wonder of the world. Some argue that it should have been. This was a great place to live. Now, not if you're Jewish, of course. And when they were conquered, a lot of this is written from the Jewish perspective, but it's important for us to balance it out and see that for the people of Babylon at this time, this was a wonderful time to be alive if you're going to be alive in 600 BC, right? So this actually was a wonderful place. So he built this statue. Well, why did he build this statue? Well, let's keep going. 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. This is the other part of verse 1 there, which is 90 feet, by the way. If you know a baseball diamond, it's the distance from home base to first base. 90 feet tall, that's how tall the statue was. And set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image. That's long writing for all the important people that he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and people of every language, this is what you're commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, a couple of quick things here. This actually wouldn't have been a hard decision for the people because it was basically, it was a pagan culture. They already believed in a pantheon. They already believed in a bunch of different gods. And so this was more than anything just kind of a light reminder from with the blazing furnace involved, we'll get to that. But this was kind of a reminder from King Nebuchadnezzar of what their roots were, of what got them this far. He's like, look, we're 20 years into this thing and we're enjoying unprecedented peace. We need to look at this image and we need to remember our gods and we need to remember how we got here and we need to lighten up a little bit. We need to remember that we're alive in a really good time. Now that would have been easy for any of the people. But what did the blazing furnace actually look like? Well, we have no idea. Okay, that's the short answer. The historians, especially in this time when they look at this, most scholars believe that they've got a rough idea, and we'll look at a picture here in just a second of what it might have looked like. But there really wasn't a precedent for this. They don't find a lot of kingdoms executing people via fiery furnace. Like that just didn't happen. And so there's only one other biblical account of this back in Jeremiah 29 that I believe Dan actually hit on, where there were a couple of false prophets in Babylon that it said King Nebuchadnezzar threw into a fiery furnace. So apparently this might have just been his thing, right? Like if every king's got a thing, then this is his thing. So what did this blazing furnace actually look like? Let's throw that picture up there. This is the closest thing that we can come up with. This is like a 17th century thing in the English countryside though. So this is not even close. Like this was, 1,000 years removed from when this would be. But when you're looking at it, it's got a lot of holes around the outside for air to get in and around. And there's a step down when you go into it. Most of them believe that you would walk down into this thing where the fire would be collected and it would go up kind of like a chimney. And so this thing had to be really big. If it's going to fit 3 grown men in it, and they're able to walk around, as we'll see later, pretty big thing. So this is kind of what the image was of this big fiery furnace. It was terrifying. I mean, nobody wanted to be thrown into that. And so this is what he gave him an ultimatum with. He's like, okay, bow down and just remember why you're here, or be my guest and walk right into that furnace. That was his ultimatum. And so for the people, not a big deal, but it was a big deal for a certain few. So we pick up in verse 7. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They all essentially noped out. They were like, nope, all right, we're going down, not going there. Not me, not today. Verse 8, at this time, some astrologers, or Chaldeans, this would have just been some of the nobles again, came forward and they denounced the Jews. And they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. It's like, yep, that's what he said. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. It would have been a big deal for King Nebuchadnezzar because since they believed in a lot of different gods, it made no difference to them. They could worship multiple gods at once. But there was something about the exclusivity of the Jews, the lack of any incentive or desire to worship another god that really drove him up a wall. But I think in the names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we have something. You see, Daniel was given the Chaldean name. We talked about earlier that he was given a Chaldean name. All of them were. Well, Daniel didn't take it. Obviously, it's the book of Daniel, and he even refers to himself as Daniel throughout. His name was supposed to be Belteshazzar, but he went by Daniel. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these were their Chaldean names. For some reason, they didn't change their names. They kept them. And so what do they mean? Hananiah means God has been gracious, and that was Shadrach. They changed his name to Shadrach, which means the command of Aku, one of their gods. Mishael, who is what God is, was changed to Meshach, which is who is what Aku is. A clear mockery of his name there, making fun of him essentially. Azariah, meaning the Lord has helped, was changed to Abednego, which is servant of Nebo. You see, their names, and especially in Jewish culture, names had so much power. They were prophesying pieces for your life. You know, when they went to name a child, they named them with something that they wanted to prophesy over their lives, because that's what they were going to be called day in and day out, every single day. That's the name they were going to hear. And so they painstakingly named people. So what possessed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, serious Jews, to not want to change their names back? Well, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, they chose their battles very carefully. They didn't die on every hill. I mean, and I mean this with the utmost respect, but we look around at the culture today, and a lot of times Christians are known for what they're against rather than what they're for. We want to stand up and be quote unquote culture warriors and denounce this. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have said, but it's a wisdom thing. It's a wisdom thing of, okay, we're in this culture. These three guys were in this culture, rooted in and surrounded by this pagan belief system. And so what were they willing to let slide, and what were they willing to not let slide? Well, apparently they were not willing to bow down. And so what happened on account of that? Well, let's see in verse 13. This would have been a big deal for Nebuchadnezzar. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Now notice that he brought them before him. Okay, he didn't immediately throw them into the furnace like he promised. So that tells us that these three guys were beloved. Although there were a lot of people that maybe didn't like them, these three guys King Nebuchadnezzar liked them. They were doing something right in this culture. They weren't just hateful against him. They didn't get in his face and disagree with everything he did. They lived their lives with a sort of quiet, redemptive difference that was noticed and appreciated in this society. But they had to draw a line, and this is where they draw the line. So King Nebuchadnezzar brings them in, and he says to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I've set up?" To him, it made no sense. He said he would worship the God of Israel, but he also worshiped his gods. He could not understand why they couldn't just bow down and worship his as well. He did the same for them. But in verse 15, it says, "Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music," if I had $1 for every time I read that today, "if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" He's reminding them, he's like, look, all you have to do is just bow down and worship it. I'm not even asking you to refuse your God. I just want you to bow down and worship this one. It's a principle. The people need to be rallied around again. It's not a big deal. Just bow down. Just do this. You kept your names. You kept all this, but why is this such a big deal? He was obviously triggered and angry about this. But what did they say? This is what they said, and this is amazing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." They're just like, we don't need to defend ourselves. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you've set up. They made it clear. They even took it a step further and they said, we want you to know. They were like, don't miss this, king. We want you to know without a shadow of a doubt, this is a line we will not cross. We have chosen our battles selectively, and this is one that we will wage and stake our lives on. So how did they get there? We have all this buildup and we're thinking about how could they have made a decision in this society with all the moral ambiguity and the gray areas like we do today, whether it's Netflix consumption or video games or music or vocation and how that overlaps to the clothes we wear and the food we eat, the moral questions that come with that. And we're trying to navigate that as best we can as people of God, as followers of Jesus. How can we do this wisely? How can we bring honor to God in this? There's so many questions, but how did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego begin to make some decisions and say, okay, this is something that's permissible. We'll allow this, but this is something that we won't allow. And so as we translate that to today, there's a term there. It's called spiritual formation, right? We've heard it before. It's whenever you, basically, it's the things that you do that are going to form you into the type of person who would do something else. And in this case, it's to form you into the type of person who would do the things that Jesus did. In the church world, a lot of times we try to do this lazily. I mean, if we can be honest, we try to have all of the things that basically writing a check that we can't cash. We want to have all of these things without actually putting in the work to do it. We think that as Christians, we're opposed to work, but that's not really the case. We're opposed to earning, but not to work, not to effort, not to the things that are going to allow us to become better. And not just in a self-help way, but in a way that's going to actually add value to us and the people around us. It's a value. There's a quote from Portland Seminary that I have up here about spiritual formation. It says, it's an organic, lifelong, and holistic process involving right thinking, which is orthodoxy, right behaviors, which is orthopraxy, and right feelings, which is orthopathy of individuals and communities. And so I believe when we look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's life, they have these staples. They approach everything not in here's a black and white list of these are our do's and these are our don'ts. And these guys were legalists. I mean, they were Jews in the Old Testament. They followed the law. But even they knew when they were thrust into the throngs of a new society, of a culture in a world that was totally different than that they had ever grown up with or imagined, that they had to incorporate a new set of rules. They had to find a way to, and the term we use in the church world is hermeneutics, how we apply scripture to our daily lives, how we bring it from there and actually implement it. They knew that in order to navigate this place and bring honor and glory to God and to love their neighbors and to serve their neighbors, that they would have to do this. They would have to have the right thinking, right behaviors, and right feelings. And that's not like a morally whatever. It's right. It's thinking about things as they are. It's having behaviors that add value to themselves, whether that's exercising and eating right, to actually sitting down and meditating or praying or thinking about God, to the right feelings, identifying feelings every day. They had all the reason in the world to be bitter, morose, angry, mean people for what the Babylonians did to the Jews, but they didn't. They just didn't. They were liked. They were sweet. They stayed sweet in the face of adversity, and that's crazy. Their feelings toward others, they checked them. They checked them in their heart. They're like, look, it is what it is. God does not allow anyone to come into power who he doesn't allow to, and he's got a plan for this. And they knew that when they looked at the prophecies that this was going to happen on account of their behavior, but that God will deliver them. He will deliver them out of this. He will pull them to the other side of this. They knew that. And so that actively affected the way that they viewed their neighbors. It actively affected the way they behaved and the way they thought and the way they felt. And so the first part of the answer to our question is that the trio prioritized form in their lives. They prioritized form. When they're waking up every day making decisions, and for us, I mean, just right now in 2020 is, if you're a business owner listening to this, you're having to grapple with the questions of how you're going to open in the face of this pandemic, or how you're going to staff, or what you're going to do with the people that you have, or maybe it's with kids in school and making decisions about work and all of this stuff that you're working through and thinking about in this new normal. I believe if we asked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego about their advice for this, the first thing they would say would be to form our lives after God, to form our lives. It's like, look, we'll get to the answer. We'll get to figuring out what answer that we put forth for these decisions, but let's first be formed. We got to be the type of people who are going to make these decisions that are wise. But that's not it. That's not the whole equation, because that sounds an awful lot like it's all us. But they would say, no, let's get to the second part. So then in verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. So beforehand, he loved them. He gave them a second chance, and now he didn't want anything to do with them. He couldn't believe it. And so he ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire actually killed the soldiers who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's a big deal if we remember how the picture looked of what we thought about. They had to kind of go down this passageway, this small little corridor. And so if we're looking at it like that, just to get a visual of what's going on here, they tried to heat the furnace and throw them in, but it was so hot that the flames actually reached out and grabbed them. Like that, this is the hottest fire you could think about, times maybe 4 or 5, or 7, because it says 7 times hotter, depending on how you read it. So Anyways, so they were thrown into this fire. Verse 22, we'll start there again. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Verse 23, and these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement. And he asked his advisors, weren't there three men that we tied up and threw into the fire? He's like, Benny, Lenny, or Josh didn't get, they didn't fall in there and walk around with them, right? Like, it's like, no, those soldiers, they're gone. It's like, well, wait a minute. He's like, look, I certainly, Your Majesty. And he said, look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the fourth one looks like a son of the gods. It's like, I don't even have a word for what this fourth person looks like. And I believe in that time when he's looking at that, he's like, there's someone else in there walking around in this fire. And he's probably like, it's tripping me out. Like, I see there are three people, and that's amazing enough. But then there's a fourth person, and he looks divine. There's something crazy about this person, so crazy I can't put words to it. And so there was someone that was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at this time. And so they had the form. And then there was something else. Back in the 60s, there was a book that was written called Silence. And it was basically about, it was a fictional account of what actually happened in 17th century Japan, where the government there at the time cracked down really hard on Christians. If you were a follower of Jesus, you were brutally beaten, tortured, killed until you turned away from it. And so it was a really, really rough and a difficult time. And in this story, in this fictional account, there's these three men, and they're all priests in the Catholic Church, and their mentor goes to this place in Japan, and they don't hear from him for a while. And these two other guys, their names are Francisco and Rodriguez, and they're waiting and anxiously hoping to hear back and wonder what's happened to their mentor. And finally they do, and they actually hear that he's walked away from the faith, that he's turned his back on God. And so these men were so moved by compassion for their mentor that they packed up everything as fast as they could, and they went straight to Japan, which was the epicenter of persecution in the world. It would have been the last place that any Christian would want to go, and they ran as fast as they could into this. And so they get there, and they link up with a lot of the Christians in the area, and they're seeing how they're doing church underground. And it's crazy because this was a time where the Catholic Church had a huge presence, but they were having to do church in a different way because of the persecution in the area. And so they're searching for their mentor, and the long story short is they do find him, and they realize that he has really walked away. Francisco passes away in the process of trying to find him, and so all that's left is Rodriguez, and he's left by himself before these government officials, and he's surrounded by all of these other Christians that they've found out and brought before him. And I won't describe the form of torture. It's bad that they used, but they realized that Rodriguez wasn't going to repent. I mean, he wasn't going to change his mind. And so they decided to do something else. They said, all right, well, we're not gonna torture you anymore. And they put him in a cage, and they took all the other Christians and they subjected them to that torture in front of him. And the way that they would do this is they would give them an opportunity. They would put an icon, which would have been, a veneration of Mary, or in this case, it would have been Jesus. And all they had to do was reach out and hit it with their hand. And if they did that, then they would stop the torture. They'd let him down, they'd let him go. And that was their thing. It sounds an awful lot like the decision that King Nebuchadnezzar was trying to make, to tell his people, like, look, if you just do this, you can walk away, you're good. Because that's what the government in charge was doing at this time. But there was a huge catch. A lot of these Christians that were being tortured in front of Rodriguez were trying to repent. They were trying to get down. They were saying that they would walk away, that they would quit. But the Japanese officials said, well, we're not going to let any of them down until you repent, Rodriguez. And so now he's faced with this decision where he's sitting here, and he knew that he would never step down from his faith, and that he wouldn't walk away from God, but now he's faced with this impossible decision. How am I just supposed to sit here and watch these people die that are trying to get down, or what? And we won't go into the answer of it. The point of this is that that's a really hard decision to make. And that was something that we think about in our lives, that's happening around the world today, even right now. The uncomfortable things that we don't want to think about are happening. And the chances are in this room or listening, we won't encounter that kind of persecution. But the fact remains is what are we putting in right now that's going to allow us to make a decision when the time comes, or if the time comes? If we're faced with an impossible scenario like this account did, what are you going to lean on to help you to make that decision? Is it going to be yourself? Is it going to be just what you're doing on a daily basis, your regularly scheduled programming, as it were, your day in, day out routine? What is it that's going to be there? And there was something. In the culmination of the novel, they actually talk about, the name of the book is Silence, because it talks about how God suffers with his people. And when I think about that, I think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I think about the fourth person who was in the fire with them, that it was a testament to what was to come. Obviously, we believe everything in the New Testament, or the Old Testament, was building to Jesus, and everything in the New Testament is looking back to him. He is the epicenter of history, as it were. I mean, our whole system for labeling the year is after him. And a God that big and that magnificent would take that amount of concern and care for us, that not only would he allow suffering to happen in the world, because that's one thing, that he would allow suffering. I know that's a question I've grappled with in my life. I'm in my journey with faith, which took a while. I grew up around the church, but I had my questions and my doubts and concerns, and I didn't really make a decision until later. But there's something to be said with a God who comes down and decides to suffer with people. And so, of course, he delivered them from this fire, and he was with them through it all. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and any other martyr throughout history, any other person that's been faced with impossible decisions, there's a book out there called The Fox's Book of Martyrs that has all of these stories of people who have lost their lives in the line of fire for Jesus, running out and trying to tell people about him, that are faced with some really difficult decisions. And those are the extreme examples, but all the way down to the examples we mentioned of just your business and your daily life. There are decisions that we're going to have to make every day, and they shape our identity. And so what else other than form can come in and really be the game changer? And that would be fire. And we're not talking about fire in a sense of, the furnace. We're talking about the fire of God, the power of God. When the power of God comes into people who are formed. Mark Sayers has a saying, I kind of got these terms from him. He's a pastor in Melbourne, Australia. He talks about, for the two things that have, when you look throughout history, when renewals and revivals of God have taken place, two things have been there. It's been the form of God's people and the fire of his Spirit coming in and changing and transforming the landscape and the atmosphere. Form and fire are going to be there when revival takes place. And so when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were processing this, they were looking at it like, look, we're going to be formed and ready. We're going to have right thinking, right feeling, and right behavior. And we're going to beg for the fire of God on our knees every single day in our lives and trust him at every turn, no matter what we face, no matter how hard the decision, no matter if we get it right or if we get it wrong. We're going to put in the work today, right now, to be the kind of people that are going to bring God honor and glory whenever it counts. When it's on the line, we want to do that. Whenever we're making a decision on the well-being of others and being out for others, because the fact of the matter is these guys were friends with people in Babylon. They had to. They wore the same clothes probably. They frequented the same establishments, shopped at the same marketplaces, worked in jobs where they were rubbing shoulders with people who didn't believe the same thing that they believed, but that their hearts broke for, that they loved, that they cared for, that they regarded as neighbors and friends, even though they were the same people that laid waste to everything that they ever knew and upended their lives and brought them into a situation that they never would have asked for. But they knew they had their head on their shoulders, as we're building on these past 2 weeks. They wrestled with, what choice do we have? They had to figure out how to apply their perspective. But when the rubber met the road, that was whenever they said, look, we're going to become the type of people that can do this, the type of people. And so the fallout of this is we're looking at Nebuchadnezzar's response in verse 26. He says this, Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and he shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and what a sight that would have been. I mean, how confused do these guys have to be? They're like, all right, well, we didn't die, I think. This isn't the afterlife. They're coming out, they're like, that's still King Nebuchadnezzar, that's still everything else. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. All these people that had accused them came up and were like, what in the world? And they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies. And not only did the fire not harm them, there was no hair on their heads that were singed or on their beards. Their robes were lost my place, that's great. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them at all. There was no evidence. I mean, like when you have a bonfire, you at least smell like the smoke, but they didn't smell like anything. It was like there was never a fire at all. Something that was so hot that it killed the people that threw them in there, didn't even leave a mark, or even if you saw them, you would have no idea that they just walked out of a furnace that hot. That's what happens when the power of God comes into a situation. And everybody saw this. It was a miracle, and they couldn't believe their eyes. So then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." And that was the first time King Nebuchadnezzar had reckoned with the idea that there's a reason that these guys have an exclusive take on this God. There's a reason that they only want to worship this God and not any others, because this is the true God. And he said, "Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into rubble, piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Chapter 2 ended with a promotion for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and chapter 3 did. And so sometimes things happen in life that are setbacks and then come back around and we find ourselves in a new spot. But for them, they knew that being formed, having the formation in place in their life would lead to elevation. And elevation doesn't mean elevation financially or in a job or with the favor of people around them, but elevation in their step and pathway with God, that he would take care of them at every point. They didn't have to worry about it. And they even said, look, if we walk into this fire and he doesn't deliver us, he doesn't. But we're still not going to worship your gods because he's our God. And we know he's good and we know he's true. And we know that he could deliver us from this fire and he could change the game and everything. And so that was their take and that was their story, and they stuck with it. And God delivered them from that furnace. And as we can see here, it changed the hearts and lives of a lot of people. And as we're going to be diving in the coming weeks, King Nebuchadnezzar is not done. There are more entries for this guy. He has a long journey and walk with God, and very tumultuous. But God's not done yet with this. And so there are 3 principles that I thought that we'd draw out from this that would help us kind of put some handles on this story and what's going on. Number 1 is whenever we're approaching life, we've got to remember why we're here. I've quoted some verses after these, and in your groups or in another time, you're more than welcome to look those up or look those up on your own. They're passages that talk about this idea of walking in faith in the world. But we've got to remember why we're here. When we're waking up every day, it's so easy, especially with all the entertainment and distraction and all of the things that are nagging and pressing for our attention, all the things that are stressing us out or causing us to worry or giving us anxiety, whether that's jobs or kids or anything else. As we're trying to make decisions in life, we got to remember, number 1, why are we here? That God is in control, that he does love us. And he is for us, and he knows every hair on our head, and that he's going to guide us and direct us. We'll be able to look back on our story at some point. It may be in heaven, and it may be here where we'll see him deliver us time and time again from things. It may not be in the way that we hope for, and it may not happen in the way that we asked. But the fact of the matter is he's going to be in control, and he's going to be in charge at every step, and he loves us. He's here for us. Number 2 is remember who the enemy is and isn't. Remember that just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't look at all the Babylonians as their enemies. They could have. They could have considered them their enemies because technically they were, but they understood something deeper. They understood that the real battle and that the real war that they were waging was an invisible war. Is with as that verse that is there quoted in Ephesians 6, the rulers, the princes, the power of the air, the kingdoms of darkness, all of this stuff that's being waged in the spiritual realm. And not like, in a weird mystic way, but like all the things that are at play around us that are affecting our decisions, that are affecting identities. Sin is the word that we use for our brokenness and our fallenness as we've fallen away from a God who loved us and originally put forth a good design that was perfect, but he gave us a choice because God even knew that love isn't love without a choice. And he gave us one. He put forth that back in the garden all the way in Genesis. But even in that time, we see that the decisions we've made, the nature that we've taken on account of it, the nature with a drive and a propensity for error and wrong, and we can look at that in our own lives, the way that we hurt people, the words that we say that we shouldn't have, the things that we do that are for our own interests, for the money and for the accolades and the status and all of this stuff that we do from a misguided standpoint. Those are the things that are waging war inside of us every single day. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't pay any attention to the people around them, were they their enemy or not. Even if those people were actively trying to kill them, like King Nebuchadnezzar was at one point. They knew that the enemy was sin. The enemy was the evil one. And that in this life, they would be delivered. They were saved by the power of God. They knew and trusted and loved Jesus. It wasn't something that was intended to be something that you would rack your brain about. How in the world do I know God? Well, God came to know us. He gave us his word, and he gave us Jesus, who came and changed everything. And even before then, they knew that he would be sending one. And now they're in heaven and looking at this, and they're, if that's even theologically correct, if they're looking at this. Anyways, we don't know. But they're able to look at this and say, God was faithful, God was good, and he delivered us. And so they didn't waste their time worrying about who their enemy was politically, relationally, all of this stuff, because they knew there was a bigger war to fight than that. They didn't have time to worry about that. So you got to remember who the enemy is and who it's not. And the last thing is remember what matters. Remember what matters. For them, they remembered why they were here and who the enemy was and wasn't, but they also remembered when they were making decisions about, hey, are we going to change our names or not? A lot of people would have looked at that and would have said, yeah, you should definitely change your name if you could. But for some reason, they just didn't think it was that big of a deal. They thought, that they would just keep using that, but in other ways that they would be walking with God. That was the decision that they made. And they made that decision based on what mattered. Why were they here, right? Who's the enemy and who isn't? And because of that, we know what matters. We can separate it out. We can look at any money problem, any relational problem, and we can divulge and extrapolate out of that what matters and what doesn't. And so these are the things that went into their identity to form them into the type of people that could make a call. And so the answer to the question that we posed at the beginning is, and that question was, what do you think in your most crucial moment will enable you to make a wise decision? The answer to that would be form and fire. The form that you have and the fire of God in your life, him coming alongside you and you putting in the work for right thinking, right feeling, right behavior, not just morally right, but things that are going to add value to your life. Those are the things that when they collide, the full potential of what God wants to do in this world are unleashed. And it's something that we could never put words to or imagine, but we can experience it. And he's here with us right now with that. And so as we're closing up today, we're kind of landing the plane on this. We're talking about decisions. We're talking about how they affect our lives. And I look back on my life and I made a lot of poor decisions early on and even later. And none of us are above any sort of ability to be fallible. But even now, I think about all the decisions that I made carelessly without a thought in the world and how that affected me in the long term. And so for you, as you're listening to this today, maybe you find yourself in a spot where you're not a believer, you don't know much about this Jesus stuff, or maybe you did grow up in the church and you just don't like it. You got a bad taste in your mouth with it. And for that, I want to say, I fully relate. I get it. I've felt that. I've tasted that myself. But there's one thing that separates everything out whenever you truly encounter this one thing, and that's the person of Jesus. Not who people say Jesus is, not what you've heard about Jesus, but who he really is. When he comes in and you encounter that, your life is never the same. There's something about that encounter that you don't want to live any other way. And so for you today, maybe you want to make that decision. Maybe you're feeling the tug in the presence of God in your life. And maybe that's weird for you to say out loud or to think about, but maybe it's happening for you. And we just want to say that we would love to talk with you about that. If you're on our online platform, which you would if you're listening to this, but if you're on Facebook or on Journey's website, we have hosts who are available on those who are fielding questions in the chat. But there are also places where you can submit prayer requests. And if you did that, you could even say in there, look, I'm thinking about this whole thing with Jesus. I just want to have a conversation about it. And that's what we would love to do. It's a no pressure thing. We're not trying to talk anybody into Jesus. That's not what we're about. What we're about is the life and the message and the hope of Jesus. And so we would love for you to at least mull that over and think about that. And we would love to come alongside you if you would have us in helping you make that decision. And maybe you're thinking about this and you are a follower of Jesus and you're looking at your decisions in life like we all do and like we all must. And you're like, man, I'm just not where I want to be. I'm not, I set these goals and I'm not adding up, but I always just feel like I'm not enough. I always feel like I'm falling on my face every single time. Like I'm trying to be in the Word and I'm trying to pray and I'm trying to not say these things and I'm trying to act this way, but it's just so hard and so complicated. Today, could it be the first invitation for you that this is not a day one, everything changes in your life sort of thing. This is a organic, lifelong process that starts with one decision and crescendos into a bunch of decisions that will be to your benefit for God's glory and for the love and care for those around you and in your life. And so today, maybe that means just saying, all right, well, I'm going to read a verse a day. I'm just going to read a verse. I'm not going to put pressure on myself to sit down and write out a bunch of stuff and feel like I have to journal. I'm just going to start with this one thing. I'm going to start with the first thing I do when I wake up before I touch my phone is I'm just going to pray. Even if it's a couple of lines, I'm just going to say a couple things to God before I start my day. You can start small, you can go big, but the biggest thing for you is to just make one decision. And then out of that one decision, you replace something that maybe wasn't the best decision, but wasn't the best habit. And you begin to incorporate that new decision to the point that it overshadows and overtakes the other one. And then you'll wake up one day and feel like that was a different person back then. Can't even imagine that you didn't want to do the things that you want to do right now. And so if that's you today, I would just challenge you to spend some time praying and talking to God about that. And taking steps forward in that department, because that's the best thing you can do is just make one decision today. And so as we're about to sing, I'm going to pray for us and we're going to close here. And so would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for not leaving us here to figure this thing out by ourselves. Thank you for enabling us to make decisions with your help that can be for the profit of us and the people around us, that can bring you glory. Because we know you're the author of fulfillment and happiness and fun. You are. A lot of times we think that God, you just have this cosmic frown and you're a no nonsense, no fun. You come to me and you lose everything and you just stand solemnly around and you are serious, you are true, but you are also the author of any sort of laughter that could come out of our bellies, any sort of goodness that we could experience or feel in this world, whether the wind brushes our skin whenever we're sitting out by the beach or whenever we're sitting under a tree and reading a book, or we're hearing the sounds of music, of instruments that you've given human beings the capacity to be able to play. Father, your presence is all around us, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we know it or not. You're here, you're with us, you love us, you're whispering that to us every day. And even to the end of our lives, if we choose not to follow you, in the end, you will give us what we want. You will say, all right, well, if you don't want anything to do with me, then you don't have to have me. But if you'll have me, then I'm with you. And I'm with you to the end of the age and forever. And that's a beautiful picture of your gospel in Jesus, that you came and you suffered on our behalf as we're dealing with all of these questions and we're arguing about all of the theological implications and we're trying to figure out how to navigate this thing and we're doing the best that we can. You came right into the center of it, right in the middle, and you made the hardest decision that could be made, and it was a decision we couldn't even make if we wanted to. We were laying in the snow up to our ears outside. You came outside threw your jacket off, threw it around us, and threw us back in the warm house, and you stayed out there. You stayed out there for us. You bore our sin and our shame and the punishment that we deserve, because all the brokenness in this world is not somebody else's fault. It's us. It's the decisions that we make every day that undermine the people around us, that undermine ourselves, that undermine you, that cause all of the brokenness and pain. But you are in the business of redemption, and one day you will blot out all the things that are evil. You will make them as if they never existed. And because of Jesus, you're going to end all of that without having to end us. You're going to end all of that without having to end the people who are trusting in you, that choose you, that you gave the decision. God, we love you for that. We love you for who you are, that you are big, that you are lofty, that you are sovereign, but you are also personal. You are also compassionate. You're also caring and kind, and you have a smile on your face because you bore our punishment. You sent Jesus not to condemn us, but that we might be saved through his power and sacrifice. Father, may it be so in our lives. And so to all listening, to all of us here in this room, please work in us. May we have the form and the fire to accompany the work that you're doing in our lives. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.